So I know you're interested in getting a better grasp on the threats out there, the ones that could really undermine a free and just society. And that's exactly where we're headed today.
Okay, sounds good.
We're going to take a deep dive into, well, fascism. But even more importantly, we're going to explore how to actually stand up against it.
Okay.
And we're using this book, The Courage to Stand, Mobilizing Against Fascist Threats, as our guide.
Oh, interesting. I haven't heard of that one.
Yeah, it's really fascinating.
Mm.
It doesn't just define fascism, like a history lesson. It really gets into its core, its DNA.
Okay.
And it shows how those elements are echoing, even today.
Oh, wow.
But it doesn't stop there. It also offers some solid strategies for, pushing back.
Well, that's what we need, solutions, not just problems.
Exactly. And at its heart, the book says that fascism is really this ideology that tries to squash any opposition.
Right.
It's all about a super powerful state controlling tons of aspects of life.
Oh,
And it's fueled by this intense, often aggressive nationalism.
yeah, nationalism can be a tricky thing. It can unite people, but it can also be really dangerous.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And the book makes it clear that we're not just talking about, simple patriotism here.
Right.
This kind of nationalism puts the state above everything else.
Above the people.
Above the people, above their rights and freedoms.
That's scary.
It is. It's about authoritarian rule, embracing violence as a political tool,
Uh-oh.
and clinging to traditional values no matter what.
Yeah.
It's a pretty volatile mix.
Yeah, definitely.
So our mission, and we're using the courage to stand as our compass here,
Okay.
is to really dig into the roots of these threats. Where do they come from historically?
Right.
What's the ideology behind them?
Mm-hmm.
How are they showing up in our world today?
Yeah, that's the big question.
And most importantly, what can we do about it? What does the book suggest?
Okay, I'm ready to get into it.
Me too. And the scope of this book is really impressive. We'll be looking back in time, of course, but also at the beliefs that fuel fascism. We'll look at the economic conditions that can make it grow, the social and psychological aspects.
Interesting.
And then, like we said, we'll really dive into how to push back against it.
So where do we start?
Well, let's unpack this, beginning with the historical and ideological roots that The Courage to Stand lays out.
Let's do it.
So the book really dives into the early 20th century in Europe.
Oh, okay. So like post-World War I.
Exactly. And it paints this picture of a continent that was deeply scarred.
Makes sense. I mean, a whole generation was wiped out.
Right. And you had this widespread disillusionment. People were just devastated, angry.
Yeah, you can imagine.
And then on top of that, you have the economic instability. Things were just a mess.
Oh, yeah, war reparations and all that.
Exactly. And all of this created this perfect breeding ground for extreme movements to take hold.
Right. Like a disease, you need the right conditions for it to spread.
Exactly. And The Courage to Stand really meticulously traces the rise of fascism in Italy under Mussolini.
Okay.
And then Nazism in Germany with Hitler.
Right.
And it's sobering to see how similar their paths to power were.
In what way?
Well, you see this intense centralization of control, the brutal silencing of any opposition, and this really pervasive control over society, over the economy, over everything.
Wow. So what about the ideology? What were the core beliefs driving all this?
Well, the book really emphasizes this intense nationalism.
Okay.
And the idea that there's a unified national identity.
Right.
And it's often defined against some enemy,
Like an us versus them kind of thing.
Exactly. And this enemy could be internal, like a minority group, or it could be an external threat, like another country.
Right. I see. But it's more than just national pride, right?
It is. It goes way beyond that because it's about glorifying the state to the point where individual rights and freedoms become secondary.
Okay, so the state is supreme.
Exactly. The Courage to Stand really drives this point home.
Got it.
They talk about this belief in a unique and superior national identity, often linked to some glorious past that needs to be, reclaimed.
Oh, I see. Like, make our country great again kind of rhetoric.
Yeah, exactly like that.
That's powerful stuff. Taps into people's emotions.
It does.
Yeah.
And then you have authoritarianism,
Okay.
which is this deep distrust of democratic processes
Right.
and the elevation of these charismatic leaders who are presented as the only ones who can lead this national revival. And propaganda becomes absolutely key.
Of course.
It paints this really simplistic and often very distorted picture of reality.
Propaganda is dangerous because it can be so persuasive.
It is. And the book doesn't shy away from the fact that violence is a part of this ideology.
Really?
It lays out very clearly how fascist ideology glorifies violence as a legitimate way to reach political goals,
Wow.
even a necessary means.
So basically the ends justify the means.
Right. And this mindset then justifies the repression of anyone who dares to disagree.
That's chilling.
It is. Now, what's interesting is that The Courage to Stand points out some initial differences
Oh, okay. Between maybe.
between Italian fascism and German Nazism, especially when it comes to racial doctrines.
I didn't know that.
Yeah. But over time, Mussolini, in Italy, he starts adopting more and more anti-Semitic policies.
So they aligned eventually.
Yeah, pretty much.
Yeah.
It really shows how these movements, even if they start out a bit different, they can converge on these really dangerous, inhumane ideologies.
That's a scary thought.
It is. And the book points out the shared characteristics of these regimes.
What kind of characteristics?
Well, first, you see these really powerful, charismatic leaders.
Right, like the Führer, Il Duce.
Exactly. And there's this carefully crafted cult of personality around
It
them.
makes them seem almost godlike, right?
Exactly. And propaganda was everywhere.
Saturating every aspect of life.
Right. And they promoted this really militaristic culture.
Okay.
And then, of course, there's the systematic repression carried out by groups like the Gestapo and the OVRA.
Right.
It's chilling to read about. And the book also talks about the role of youth mobilization.
Oh, like the Hitler Youth.
Exactly. It shows how deeply these ideologies tried to indoctrinate young people.
Wow, that's really disturbing. It's like they were trying to control the future.
They were. And as The Courage to Stand argues, understanding this history is crucial if we want to recognize how economic factors can create an environment where these movements can thrive.
Okay, so let's talk about economics then. How does the economic landscape foster fascism, according to the book?
Well, the book makes this really clear connection between widespread economic discontent
Okay.
and the erosion of trust in democratic institutions.
That makes sense. If people are struggling, they might start looking for radical solutions.
Exactly. When people are dealing with unemployment, rising inflation, their wages are stagnant,
Right.
their quality of life is going
They're
down.
going to be frustrated.
They are. And they're going to be disillusioned with the system.
So they become more open to extreme ideas.
Exactly. The Courage to Stand paints a very clear picture of the post-World War I economic crises,
Okay.
especially in Germany. Think hyperinflation, the pressure of those Treaty of Versailles reparations.
Right, right.
And in Italy, you had this huge decline in industrial production.
So people were ripe for the picking, so to speak.
Yeah, they were hurting, and fascist movements knew how to exploit that. They promised a return to national strength, economic prosperity.
It's that promise of a quick fix, right? When people feel like they have nothing left to lose.
Exactly. They capitalized on those feelings of powerlessness and offered these seemingly radical solutions.
And did it work?
Well, the book also highlights the role of widening economic inequality.
Okay, how so?
When you have this huge gap between the very wealthy and everyone else, it breeds resentment,
Makes sense.
and it creates this desire for fundamental change, which these extremist ideologies can then exploit.
Right, they come in and say, we can fix this.
Exactly. The book suggests that in times like these, people are more willing to ditch democratic norms if they think an authoritarian approach will bring them economic security.
So it's like a trade-off. They're willing to give up some freedoms for stability.
Yeah. And it can become a vicious cycle.
How so?
The Courage to Stand points out how fascist regimes, once they're in power, often prioritize militarization.
Right.
They pour tons of money into defense spending.
Project strength.
Exactly. And while that might create some jobs in the short term, it can actually make the overall economic hardship even worse. Because they're diverting resources away from crucial areas.
Oh,
Like education, healthcare, infrastructure.
Ah, I see. So it's a focus on short-term gains at the expense of long-term well-being.
Right. And it's all about projecting this image of national strength, often at the expense of the majority of the population.
Interesting. So we've talked about the historical context, the economic vulnerabilities. What about the social and psychological factors?
Yeah, let's get into that. The Courage to Stand really delves into those.
What does it say?
Well, the book emphasizes that when you have major social upheaval,
Like what?
like economic instability, political corruption, or really stark social inequality,
Okay.
it can lead people to seek out a strong sense of belonging. and identity.
Right.
And they often find it within these collectivist ideologies.
Like fascism.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And fascist leaders are really good at tapping into that need, that
Yeah.
human need for belonging.
Yeah. They promote these narratives of intense national pride, this feeling of shared identity, but it's often based on exclusionary principles.
Oh, so it's like we're the good guys and they're the bad guys.
Exactly. And The Courage to Stand also talks about how modern society can leave people feeling disconnected,
Okay.
adrift,
Right.
and that can make them vulnerable to these extremist ideologies.
Because they offer answers.
They offer answers, yeah. Simple answers, and often scapegoats for all their frustrations.
That's dangerous. It is. The book really highlights the psychological appeal of fascism.
Yeah, what is it about it that draws people in?
Well, especially during times of crisis. There's this deep human yearning for belonging,
Right.
for a clear sense of identity, and for order.
Makes sense.
Fascist organizations provide that. Of course, it's a really warped sense of community.
Okay.
But they offer these simple narratives, convenient scapegoats.
Mm.
And it can be really seductive when people are feeling overwhelmed by complexity, by
I
uncertainty.
can see that.
And The Courage to Stand really stresses how these movements give a sense of purpose,
Okay.
of belonging
True.
to people who feel marginalized or lost.
Right. They're looking for something to hold on to.
Exactly. And the book also emphasizes how fascist ideologies exploit existing resentment, feelings of victimhood.
Okay.
They foster this us versus them mentality, which is so divisive.
Yeah, it pits people against each other.
It does. And it's ultimately destructive.
So they create this enemy.
Yeah. It's a really effective way to consolidate power. Because by creating this perceived common enemy, they can rally support
Right.
and distract people from the real issues.
Oh, so they're manipulating people.
They are. And the book also touches on the impact of shared trauma.
Okay.
Like if a population has gone through a major war or an economic collapse, it can make them more susceptible to these radical ideologies.
Because they promise.
Because they promise revenge,
Yeah, okay.
a restoration of national pride, a return to some former glory.
It's all about exploiting those deep-seated emotions.
Exactly. So given all of this, the history, the economic factors, the social and psychological elements, how does the book see these fascist tendencies manifesting in our world today?
That's the million-dollar question.
It is. And The Courage to Stand makes it very clear.
Okay.
We might not see exact replicas of, 1930s fascism, but the underlying tendencies, the core elements, they're still around.
In different forms.
Right. The book points to the rise of populist leaders. They're really good at capitalizing on economic discontent and cultural anxieties.
Yeah, I could see that happening.
And this often morphs into this really exclusionary form of ethno-nationalism.
No nationalism.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Where certain groups are targeted and scapegoated.
Oh, so it's like blaming specific groups for society's problems.
Exactly. And The Courage to Stand specifically warns about the development of this cult of personality around powerful leaders.
Okay, what do you mean by that?
Well, it's this tendency to see a leader as a savior, the only one who can fix things.
Right.
It can really undermine healthy political opposition and critical thinking.
Oh, I see, because people stop questioning them.
Exactly. And the scapegoating tactics are really insidious.
Yeah.
Blaming minorities creates this false sense of unity.
Right. But it's based on exclusion.
Exactly. And The Courage to Stand also raises concerns about mainstream political figures endorsing extremist groups.
Really?
Yeah. Even if it's just tacit approval. When you see vigilante actions being romanticized
Okay.
or portrayed as patriotic,
Right.
it's a really worrying sign.
It normalizes that kind of behavior.
Exactly. And The Courage to Stand really emphasizes the need for vigilance.
Yeah, we can't be complacent.
We can't. We can't just assume our democratic institutions are safe.
Right.
We have to be proactive.
So what can we do? What does the book suggest?
Well, that's a big part of The Courage to Stand. It actually outlines specific strategies for mobilizing against these threats.
Okay, I'm all ears.
Let's start with building community awareness.
Sounds good.
The book really stresses education as the foundation.
Okay.
We need accessible programs that explain the history and the ideology of fascism.
So people can recognize the warning signs.
Exactly. And the book suggests workshops and seminars that focus on contemporary threats.
Okay, more specific.
Yeah, like prevention strategies.
Mm-mm.
And creating public forums for open and honest discussion.
Right, where people can share their concerns.
Yeah, and learn from each other.
Yeah, makes sense. What else does the book suggest?
Well, it talks about the importance of readily available information,
Like what?
like community newsletters that share updates on local activism.
Okay, so people know what's going on.
Yeah, it can help foster this sense of collective action.
All right, we're all in this together.
And of course, in today's world, social media campaigns are essential.
Oh, yeah. Huge reach.
Right. You can reach a much broader audience and get them engaged.
Typically.
Now, what I found really insightful is the book's emphasis on art.
Art.
Yeah, it talks about how art can be a powerful tool to challenge these ideologies.
Interesting. Like how?
Well, it gives the example of the Dada movement,
Okay.
which used art to challenge authoritarianism after World War I.
Oh, right.
And it encourages contemporary artists to do the same.
Use their creativity to fight back.
Exactly. Whether it's visual arts, literature, performance, music.
Oh, wow. So art as a weapon against fascism.
In a way, yeah. And the book also talks about film screenings, both documentaries that provide facts and analysis and narrative films that explore the human impact.
Oh, yeah. Stories can be so powerful.
They can. They raise awareness and spark dialogue.
Definitely.
And the book even mentions community theater,
Really?
focusing on themes of resistance and unity.
Wow. So using theater to promote these values.
Exactly. It's about connecting with people on a deeper level.
So all of these strategies are about raising awareness.
Yeah, they're about giving people the knowledge and the skills to recognize fascist rhetoric and resist its spread.
Okay, that makes sense. But awareness is only the first step, right?
Right. The courage to stand also delves into legal and political action.
Okay, now we're talking. What does it suggest there?
Well, it emphasizes advocating for specific anti-fascist legislation
Okay, at what level?
at all levels of government.
Makes sense. You need laws to protect against these threats.
Exactly. And it highlights the importance of local governance,
Okay, what do you mean?
getting involved in community-level decisions.
Right, grassroots activism.
Exactly. And strengthening core democratic institutions,
Like
like the judiciary, legislative bodies, electoral commissions,
okay.
our education systems.
So making sure these institutions are strong and resilient.
Yeah, that they can withstand these kinds of threats.
That's so important.
It is. And the book also talks about monitoring extremist groups.
Oh, that's a good idea, keeping an eye on them.
Yeah, and providing legal support to people who are targeted,
Right.
people who experience harassment or discrimination.
They need protection.
They do.
Okay.
And the courage to stand points to broader policy advocacy,
Okay, like what?
supporting human rights, equality for all.
Right, fundamental values.
Exactly. And of course, consistent electoral participation.
Voting.
Yes. And voter education initiatives.
So people are informed and engaged.
Exactly. And this isn't just about what happens within one country.
Oh, okay.
The courage to stand really emphasizes the need for international cooperation.
Right, because these threats can cross borders.
They can. And building strong coalitions with diverse groups.
Yeah, strengthen numbers.
Exactly. Now, another critical area that the book addresses is countering propaganda and misinformation.
Oh, yeah, that's a big one these days.
It is. The courage to stand talks about the need to develop materials that challenge these narratives head on.
Okay, like what kind of materials?
Well, it could be factual information, personal stories, even visual counter-propaganda.
Interesting. So fighting fire with fire, in a way.
Kind of, yeah.
Huh.
But it's also about promoting media literacy,
Okay.
helping people develop critical thinking skills.
Right, so they can spot fake news.
Exactly. And the book highlights the importance of supporting independent journalism.
Yeah, real journalism, not propaganda.
Right. And fact-checking initiatives.
Okay.
And it stresses the responsibility of individuals in their social media use.
Right, we all have a role to play.
We do. And holding social media platforms accountable.
Yeah, they need to do their part to stop the spread of this stuff.
They do.
Okay.
And the book also suggests hosting discussions and debates
Okay.
where these narratives could be challenged and dismantled.
That's a great idea. Open, honest dialogue.
Exactly. And then the courage to stand gets into community-based resistance.
Okay, what does that look like?
Well, it highlights the power of collaborating with journalists to amplify anti-fascist messages,
Right.
to bring these stories to a wider audience.
Okay, using the media to spread the word.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And sharing stories of historical resistance.
Oh, yeah, showing people that it's been done before.
Right. That
Thank
people
you.
have fought back and won.
That's inspiring.
It is. And establishing local monitoring and reporting groups.
Okay, what would those groups do?
They would keep an eye out for extremist activities,
Hmm.
and offer support to individuals and communities who become targets.
Okay, like a neighborhood watch, but for fascism.
Yeah, kinda. And the book talks about neighborhood assemblies.
Okay, what are those?
These are local gatherings
Mm-mm.
where people can build solidarity and organize collective action.
Right, at the grassroots level.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And it underscores the importance of volunteer networks
Okay.
to provide support to those who are targeted,
Right.
people who are experiencing hate or discrimination.
It's about showing up for each other.
It is.
Um,
And the Courage to Stand also talks about petition drives to influence policy changes.
okay, so using people power to create change.
Yeah. And solidarity events to articulate shared values.
Right, showing a united front.
Exactly. And then it gets into nonviolent direct action
Oh,
and civil disobedience.
like what?
Well, it references leaders like Gandhi and Martin Luther King Jr.
Okay.
as examples of how effective these tactics can be.
Right.
And the book mentions symbolic protests,
Like,
sit-ins, die-ins, peaceful marches.
so making a statement through action.
Exactly. And
Mhm.
finally, The Courage to Stand looks at how we can sustain democratic values in the long term.
Okay, that's the key, right? It's not just about fighting the immediate threats, but about building a better future.
Exactly. And the book really stresses inclusive economic policies
Okay.
that address the root causes of inequality.
Right, because inequality can create fertile ground for these ideologies.
Exactly. And protecting and supporting independent media.
Yeah, we need a free press.
We do. And promoting cultural exchange programs
Okay.
to foster understanding and break down stereotypes.
Right, building bridges between different
Yes,
groups.
exactly. And celebrating those national democratic milestones, those reminders of our shared values.
Yeah, those are important.
They are. And the book talks about restorative justice practices.
Okay, what are those?
They're about healing divisions in society, building stronger communities,
Okay, I see.
and promoting interfaith dialogues.
Right, bringing people of different faiths together.
Exactly. And developing youth leadership programs.
Oh, that's crucial. Investing in the next generation.
It is. And the book emphasizes comprehensive civic education.
Okay.
So citizens understand how their democracy works and how to participate.
Right, an informed citizenry is essential.
It is. And The Courage to Stand also talks about political action committees.
Okay.
PACs is advocating for democratic principles, seeking international accountability for human rights abuses,
Right.
building diverse and inclusive coalitions,
Okay.
establishing hate crime monitoring systems, even developing emergency response plans to protect democratic institutions during crises.
Wow, that's really comprehensive.
It is. The Courage to Stand really does provide this incredible roadmap for response.
It sounds like it. So we've covered a lot of ground here. What are the key takeaways from this deep dive into the courage to stand?
Well, I think the biggest takeaway is that fascist threats are complex.
Yeah, it's not a simple issue.
It's not. And countering them requires this multi-pronged approach.
Right.
We need to be active on so many different levels.
Individually, in our communities, nationally, even globally.
Exactly. And what I find so empowering about The Courage to Stand is that it makes it clear that every single one of us has a role to play.
Okay.
We can all do something to push back against these threats.
So what can we do? Give me some examples.
Well, we can start by educating ourselves,
Okay.
learning more about the history and ideology of fascism.
Right, so we can recognize it when we see it.
Exactly. We can build stronger connections in our communities.
Okay.
We can participate in the political process.
Right, vote, get involved in local government.
Yeah. And we can promote democratic values in our everyday lives.
So it's about being aware, being active, and being engaged.
Exactly.
This has been a really thought-provoking deep dive. I appreciate you sharing all of this with me.
Of course. So as you reflect on everything we've discussed today, think about which of these strategies really resonates with you.
Okay.
What's one small action you can take, starting today, to contribute to building a more resilient and just society?
Good question.
It's a question we should all be asking ourselves. We encourage you to explore these themes further. There are so many resources out there on anti-fascist mobilization.
Right.
It's an ongoing conversation, and it requires the active participation of each and every one of us.
I couldn't agree more.
Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me.